Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. We'll be starting soon. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bookish Hour. I am your solo host for the evening, Sarah Burr. JC will be back next week joining us for more fun bookish things. But as I love to say, it's always good to get bookish. And I can't wait for tonight's episode. I'm so looking forward to our chat with our very special guest this evening, Marcy McCreary. Marcy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Bookish Hour. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me on. Really looking forward to this.
I absolutely loved your new book, The Murder of Madison Garcia, is out. That came out relatively recently, right?
The end of March.
End of March. And it is so engrossing. Like from page one, you're just hooked. And I can't wait to talk about your process, the inspiration behind it. But before we dive into the nitty gritty, for our viewers who may not be familiar with you and your work, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and the Ford Family Mysteries?
Sure. So I've written actually four novels. So before I wrote the Ford Family Mystery series, I wrote a book called The Deeper You Dig, and you can find that on Amazon. I like to call it my training wheels novel. Right? I did it just to see if I can write a novel, and then COVID came out, and then I was like, and my daughters were like, Mom, you should self-publish it because you might die of COVID. I'm like, what? Okay, that's lovely, like a legacy. So I had no desire to actually try and sell that book. It was a kind of a pet project, but I was working on at the time on this detective series, and that I knew I wanted to traditionally publish.
Mm-hmm.
So really my whole life has been spent in marketing and sales roles, in publishing, in content marketing, even in retail data analytics. And then there just came a time where when I wrote that sort of training wheels novel, I really knew that's what I wanted to do full time.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily I had the means to do that. And my husband was like, step on out and go
Mm-hmm.
for it. And I did. And I wrote the novel, and, luckily it got picked up on submission pretty quickly. And I did not write it intending it to be a series. And
Wow.
right before it was released in September 2021, so let's say, the Publishers Weekly Review came out, let's say in August, maybe earlier, like July, the review said, an enticing series launch.
Oh, forcing your hand a little bit.
Where's my hand? I'm like, so the publisher, my editor, calls and says, what are you working on? And I was like, not another book in the series. I was actually working on something else. And I said, you know what, though? I have an idea in my head. I have an idea. So I put the other project aside and I started writing The Murder of Madison Garcia. Wow. And actually, as I was writing that book, because this was now a series, I was thinking about the third book. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't mean the plot, but the character arc. Here are characters that I need to drag across at least 3 books. And sort of that got me thinking about how to make it into a series.
Mm-hmm.
But no, not a series.
Wow.
That was just, I don't know, fate.
I absolutely am in awe, and also floored by this little origin story of yours, because your term training wheels novel, like I feel like I had exactly one of those, and like definitely had that point where I wasn't expecting for it to be a series whatsoever, because I just wanted to see if I could do it. Could I write something from start to finish? And by the time I got to the end and I had folks read it, they're like, okay, like when's the next one? I was like, what do you mean when's the next one? Like I was just like trying to figure out, like, could I actually write a book? And then, I think I'm 9 books in now to that
Nice.
Training Wheels series. And it's just like, it's amazing how once the floodgates open, the stories that are inside of you. And I can't wait to dig in more to how the the Ford family became who they are. And really quickly, just giving a shout out to the folks who are joining us live here on YouTube this evening. We've got Claudia, Farmhouse Reader, DHB, Mark. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions for Marcy throughout the show, please feel free to ask. We're happy to dive into anything, because Marcy has so many cool things to talk about that I'm sure there's going to be something that's like, oh man, like we need to explore this more. But first, let's talk about Susan. Susan Ford, she is a detective. And one thing that I found that I always love when I am reading a book is, especially when it's an area that I'm familiar with. And living in New York right now, the both of your books are set in the Catskills region. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just painting a little picture for us for both just the setting that we're being introduced to in both the disappearance of Trudy Solomon and the murder of Madison Garcia, as well as the characters that we will encounter.
So most people know this region through two things. One is Dirty Dancing, and the other is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, right? So this is the Borscht Belt section of the Catskill region. And I spent all of my summers there. My father was the activities director at one of the big hotels, the Hotel Brickman. And I mean, I had a wonderful childhood up there. I have a lot of good memories, and a lot of good memories with my dad and my family. I was a little mischievous. I mean, there I was in a hotel. I pretty was like the queen of the castle. Think Dirty Dancing, right? So, and so I knew I wanted to set a story there, or at least I thought I did. I just didn't know what it would be. I actually thought maybe a memoir, maybe a coming of age, since that's sort of how I thought about the area. And then one day I read an article in the Boston Globe, and it was a story about a waitress from the Concord Hotel who had gone missing in the 1970s. And she was found 40 years later in a memory care facility in Lowell, Massachusetts. So what happened was skeletal remains were found on the side of the road, and everyone assumed it was this missing woman. Her name was Flora Stevens. And the detective simply did a Social Security database check, and he got a ping. He got a ping that it was being used for, I guess, Medicaid or Medicare reasons in Lowell. So the two detectives went out to Lowell, Massachusetts, which is north of Boston, and they had her ID, and she said me, and she said her husband's name, and they knew it was her. Oh, wow. So I'm thinking to myself, well, my God, where's she been for 40 years? I mean, was there foul play? Did she run away? Was she in an abusive relationship? Like, what's the story? And weeks go by and there's no follow-up. So I actually call the Monticello police, and I was like, there was a story that ran, like, whatever happened to that woman? Did you find out, like, what happened to her? And they're like, we don't have the resources to look, to deal with that. We found her, case closed. And it just got stuck in my head. I was like, what happened to this woman? What happened to her? And I thought, you know what? It might be really fun to fill in those 40 years between the 1970s and now, especially because I was very familiar with the area in the 1970s. And that got me thinking about not only the setting, but the setting as a character, because that region really has a story unto its own. I mean, it actually has a character arc. It has, you have the heyday, and then you have sort of the demise of the area, and it's seeing a resurgence now. So you can almost see it in a 3-act play. And I thought this would be a great setting over a time span. And then I got to thinking, wouldn't it be really cool if that detective that found Flora Stevens, not Trudy Solomon, in Lowell, Massachusetts, was somehow related to the original detective on the case. And because my father played such an oversized role of my coming of age in my life there, I quickly thought about a father-daughter detective duo for the main characters. And that's really the origin of the story.
That I am to find such a gem, and then to just like build upon it, to me is so exciting, and such like a really cool way to begin a project, especially since you went into it not really knowing if it was going to be a mystery. And it just kind of naturally unfolded for you in that manner. That what a like creative way to really begin. We actually have a question from one of our viewers. The it's a little bit existential, I think. So DHB is asking, the idea is in your head. What does that exactly mean? Is it the beginning, the end, or is it an event? Or when you say the idea, I guess expanding upon like what was the idea?
It's usually the inciting incident.
Mm-hmm.
So my book I'm what's called a pantser, right? I don't outline. So the idea is really the inciting incident. And I think it's sort of like the broad strokes, like that story about Flora Stevens got so stuck in my head. I was so curious to what happened to her. And maybe if I didn't grow up in the Catskills, I wouldn't have cared. But I was really fixated on it for a long enough time that you begin to believe it's a gift of an idea. And I would just noodle it in my head, like I wanted Murder and Mayhem, like to fill those 40 years. I wanted almost a very poignant story in some ways, because she does end up with Alzheimer's, and she's in her own reality right now. She's in a reality that she really can't express to the detectives. And I thought that would be a really interesting point of view. So she's the ultimate unreliable narrator of her own story because she has Alzheimer's. And she's seen throughout the book in just little vignettes. She's almost like the MacGuffin. They're chasing her and they're chasing her story, and they really but what's real, but there's really a terrible crime within those 40 years.
The your mention of being a pantser, I think, and this is something that has come up frequently when we're chatting with other authors, and both JC and myself, we're very much plotters. However, I am always in awe of how you can really sit down and write a book without having an outline. And I always am kind of very like, I need to understand this, because maybe there is a better way to write a book. Sometimes it's what way works for you, but I'm curious what a writing session looks like if you're not outlining. Like, what tools are you using to guide yourself through the process?
Okay, so I have the beats in my head. Like, I'm using a 3-act structure. I'm a writer who will confess to watching a lot of movies and TV, but I think what they bring to the table is understanding the beats, especially in suspense, especially in mystery. And they're in my head. I know what I need to do at 25% of the book. I know what I need to do. I know where the pinch points are, so that I'm building suspense, building tension, creating a twist, creating a reveal in those right places. And I think a better word than a pantser is an intuitive writer. I heard that expression once, and I felt that was more in line with what I'm doing. I'm just not right. I know my first draft is going to be 80,000 words. And therefore I can understand where the beats are. So as I'm writing and I'm getting to page like 30, because I do have a map that says this is where the pinch point goes. I just don't know what it is. And I know writers say, my characters are telling me where to go. That's actually what's happening. I become Susan Ford. I sit down, and maybe it's because I'm writing a police procedural. It's pretty logical. You uncover a clue, you interview a witness, you interview a suspect, and it provides more information. And then you go and you turn over the next stone. And that's essentially what I'm doing. And I'm trying to make it fun, and I'm staying in the voice of the character. And I'm thinking about, what would be interesting? What would be an interesting turn of events? I'm always thinking that. What would be an interesting turn of events? What's a way to take maybe a common trope in mystery and turn it on its head a little bit? So I think the father-daughter duo is one of those ways. You see a lot of, good cop, bad cop, funny cop, straight cop. And that father-daughter relationship is, she's contemplative and he is, a by the gut. So you see her, saying we have to be by the book, and he's like by the gut. And it actually adds a lot of tension as I'm writing dialogue, as I'm writing the scene. So I am just, writing what feels fun and good for that first draft. Then I reverse outline. So I take it and I do an outline like people do an outline. I actually bullet point all of the main points of the book. And that just helps me understand going into the second draft, which is where I use an outline.
Oh,
Does that make
okay.
sense?
Yes. I've heard the term reverse outline used before, and maybe it's people define it differently, but the way that you're explaining it, I think makes much more sense than the ways that I've encountered it before. And you've hit so many really, really good points in your answer. The concept of an intuitive writer. I really like the sound of it. And the more that you were talking, Marcy, the more I was beginning to feel like maybe I am not as a diehard plotter as I thought that I was, because there's so many times where, I outline things by the day of, day one, the body is found. Day two, these are the people that my sleuth has to talk to. And for me, I write an amateur detective, so I don't have to follow all of these rules that we definitely have to talk about, because police procedurals are something that I'm in complete awe of, because of just how much detail and research and information that you're presenting to the reader that you yourself would have had to go and find out. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But the concept of our characters speaking to us along the way. I'm in the middle of revising my first draft of my next book, and there was a point when I was writing where my character was like, what, I think we need to like spice something up and have something big happen. And I kind of looked down at my word count and I'm like, oh yeah, like that makes sense, like that's about right. And I hadn't had it planned, but it just like comes naturally because of the pacing and making sure that pacing is on point. And I've got to say, when I was reading The Murder of Madison Garcia, that I started on page 1, and then I thought maybe 20 minutes had gone by, and I was like maybe 2 chapters in. But it was more like an hour and a half had gone by and I was 40% through the book. And I was like, what just happened? And when you're able to just like capture the reader like that, I just think is so magical. And especially when it's, these darker, heavy topics, because as someone who writes cozy mysteries, like I'm always trying to keep it light. But there's a lot of realness to what's going on in your work and the emotions that people are dealing with. And I just found that so real and raw. And the pacing was just incredibly on point. So I commend you on that.
But I read in the genre too. I read a lot in the genre of mystery, police procedural, even amateur sleuth. So in that sense, that also informs, the beats. And I really sort of like I grew up on like Dick Francis and P.D. James and a lot of the British, like Agatha Christie. I really enjoyed those. I kind of feel that mine harken back to that type of mystery. So yeah, I really thank you for saying that.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. I mean, I'm always like so delighted when I get to experience these books and get to talk with you afterwards, because it's just like, wow, like this is like the ideal reader, where I can just like, well, and now we have to go talk about all of the questions that I had.
I have a great research story to tell you, and it actually is it's in the third book. So the third book is coming out next summer. It's called The Summer of Love and Death. Summer of Love. It is a dual timeline, 1969 and 2019. And it is a case that Susan goes to a crime scene, and the crime, and it's the crime, I don't want to say too much. The crime looks like a crime from 1969, which happened to be her father's very first case. And it takes place in the Catskills, and they live in Bethel, which is where Yazda's farm is located. It'd be a lot of fun to bring Woodstock into the story. And I was at BoucherCon, I was at the writers conference, and I was telling someone how I was looking for an NYPD cop who had volunteered to be at Woodstock because I really wanted to understand what was going on from the law enforcement point of view. And it was really hard. Like there's a lot of research online about Woodstock, whatever, but I really wanted to talk to a cop who worked it. And he connected me to someone who was an NYPD volunteer peace force cop at Woodstock. And we were on the phone for hours. He gave me so much background, so much information, so many great stories. And I was like, can I use that in the book? Can I use that in the book? He's like, yeah, use it in the book.
Well, the research that you have to do just to compile a crime scene in a realistic manner when it comes to a police procedural, to me, is just mind-boggling. And I knew right away that's like, Marcy knows what she's doing, because what I would generalize is like the coroner or the medical examiner, you were calling a crime scene death investigator. And I was like, that shows some next level research to narrow in on the specific title that, you know, that particular county is using. And so I was like, okay, like I want to talk about your research methods, you know, because your background is in marketing and so I was like, okay, like what did you do when you first decided, okay, I want to write a mystery, I want to make it even harder for myself and write a police procedural? So how did you go about, you know, finding your resources or figuring out like what you needed to do to begin with?
So writers can go to their local police departments. There's usually a public affairs person there. There's sometimes a cop who just would love to help you because he's just really excited about what you're doing. So I would definitely say go to your local police. You know, there's a good chance that you would find somebody there who'd be willing to answer your questions. There are resources on Facebook, Cops and Writers, which I find very, very useful. Usually at a number of writers' conferences, there'll be tracks set aside for forensics, DNA, crime scene investigation, you know, cadaver dogs, you know, so I always take those in. With the murder of Madison Garcia, there's a whole money laundering, you know,
That
case
was
going on.
like,
I was like, okay, so my knowledge of money laundering begins and ends with Ozark, right? I mean, like that's my idea of money laundering, right? Or, you know, Breaking Bad. So I actually contacted an attorney, but what I really wanted to find out, because I did have a good sense, the mechanics of money laundering. How do the people get caught? What trips them up? What are some of the stupid things that criminals do that actually, you know, gets them found out? So, so I will talk to attorneys and lawyers and police, and you know, I will start my research online just so that I have sort of a foundation of knowledge. So the book I'm writing now, I'm writing a new book. It's not in the series. It's about 4 retired police detectives, 4 women. And that takes place in Boston. So the first thing I needed to understand was what was the structure of the Boston police department? How does that work? That you could find online. There's, you know, how the districts are broken up and how it works and what the ranks are. When I get further into the book and I have the meat of the book done, I will probably reach out to the Boston Police Public Affairs and try to find someone who can answer very specific questions about the case that I'm working on. You know? Yeah.
Wow. Well, your point about the money laundering, I realized as I was reading about the scene, you have a scene where you really explain to the reader like what the process is. And number one, I love it when I read a book and it teaches me something. And I was like, wow, I too had no idea what money laundering entailed. And I was like, oh wow, like now I came away with like a really like a much clearer understanding of what was going on. And so the clever way of which you were able to weave this like information in, but while also keeping it entertaining and keeping that pacing up was was really fabulous.
Right, and that goes back to pantsing too, because all of a sudden I realized, oh, I want money laundering is a good, was something that I all of a sudden I did not. I mean, again, it came to me probably at the point where I started writing about it, and I was like, oh, now I have to go and research it, so I have to stop what I'm doing. It's not like I do all this research ahead of time because I've outlined it. I know what I'm doing. I get to this point where I'm like, oh, I want to bring money laundering into it. So then I need to bring the feds in, right? So then I needed to understand how the Treasury Department feds work a case with local law enforcement. So all of a sudden I'm taking out of my writing and into my research. But to me, it's all part of the process. I mean, if I'm not writing, I'll be editing. I'll do something involved with the book so that I don't sort of lose momentum or, kind of lose the thread. So my goal is to write every single day. If something happens where I want to do something where I need to do some research, I'll do it some other way.
We have a comment from one of our viewers, Farmhouse Reader, saying, "I have never understood money laundering as well." So, Farmhouse Reader, the murder of Madison Garcia is going to explain it to you very, very well.
And I don't go into, it's not like I go into depth and you're going to
no. It was like a paragraph of like very concise, informative information. And I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And there was a comment about, and for me, as I was reading, I was like, well, duh, Sarah. But it was like, oh, like dirty money goes in, clean money goes out. And I was like, well, that's why it's called laundering. Like, oh my God. But I had never put that together. So you learn something new every day. Let's talk a little bit more about Susan Ford herself, because I really, really love Susan's character. Her voice was just so sensible. And one thing that I really wanted to ask you as I was reading, her poor cold that she has. I'm always so curious, and this is for me when I'm actually writing and making these decisions of like, maybe I'm going to have my character like dye their hair for an event, or maybe I'm going to do this for a character, or what have you. I'm curious, and for our viewers, Susan is plagued by this really bad cold, and I just like feel for her so much, because every person she goes up to is like, wow, like you should be at home. And she's like, I need to do my job. And I think that that's where we learn so much about her character and her strength, and also a bit about her stubbornness. And so I'm curious, was the cold a point of which to drive those traits home, or did it have like some other story device plot for you?
No, I mean, I think you nailed it on. I think you nailed that one. I used it to draw out so that the reader can especially because they're coming into the second book. And in the first book, so what you're missing in the first book, and I do mention the second book, she has a condition called palmar hyperhidrosis, and it's relentlessly sweaty palms. It's like when your hands are just constantly sweaty. And my daughter has it. And so she tells me all these funny things that, she just doesn't want to shake anybody's hand. She's very self-conscious. But other, people in the third book, a new cop says, so, does it affect your ability to hold a gun? And she's like, oh God, this is why I don't tell anybody. So she did have sort of like a physical ailment that I brought out in the first book. And I didn't want to beat it in the second book, but I like the idea that she needed to if the reader doesn't get to see her in the first book, how dogged and determined she is, and that nothing's going to stop her. I thought this was a really, really good way to do that. So give her a cold in the summer. It's really, really humid and hot during the investigation. So all of those things together, the weather, her cold, this case, her dad driving her crazy, it's sort of just to add to the, I think the tension that she feels in just trying to get through this case. So, but it's most to your point, Sarah, is that I saw it more as a way to draw out her character, not to really drive the plot in any way. Although I don't want to give anything away.
You don't have
Does he
to.
give something away? Right. It doesn't really give anything away, but she does during an interview with the money launderer, right? She passes out. And that is important because that's important to the pacing. She's about to get an answer. It's like the ultimate cliffhanger. And she hasn't eaten all day. She's got this cold, she has sinus infection, and she passes out. And so it did lead to something
Mhm.
that affected the plot. I mean, I could have done anything else, but I thought she has a cold. She's running ragged. Throw that in there.
I think, and another point to her character is, and you're talking about all of these things that are really weighing on her, and there's also this tension between her parents, and she's trying to balance all these things, and yet she was always a kind, decent person to the people around her. And I thought that was just something that, we don't normally see in our everyday lives, where people have all of this tension put on them. It's like, there are these breaking points, but she's still just so engaging with the people around her, with her team members. I really loved the dynamic that she had with Mark, who was the death investigator, and just the camaraderie with the chief, and all of these really great relationships that are being formed. And we'll circle back to talking about some of the supporting characters that pop up, but we are already at our halfway point, if you can believe it. We have Mary popping into the chat saying that she is here. Mary, we're glad that you've made it. Thank you for joining us. DHB is commenting that summer colds are the worst. And Mark is saying that Mark is a great name. So we've got definitely consensus that there's so much going on in this story. And we also have to talk about the journal entries, which I was like, this is a really cool way to present information. But before we do that, for our lucky readers who are joining us live this evening, we are doing a giveaway for U.S. residents, or people with U.S. mailing addresses, I should say. We have Marcy is doing a signed copy of The Murder of Madison Garcia, and we're really, really excited to have you guys get to experience this like thrilling. It was so refreshing to read. I just thought the pacing was just so on point. So for folks who would like to enter in for the chance to win a signed copy, Marcy, do you want to let them know what their magic word to enter is?
Father.
Father, which is very poignant because not only do we have such a great relationship to explore more with Susan and her dad, but we also have Father's Day coming up this weekend. So that's, I think, a really nice way to tie into my next question about the relationship that Susan has with the people around her. Can we talk a little bit about her parents and her dad, how he is kind of wiggling his way into these cases, even though he is no longer a detective?
Right. So, and I want to also go back to one point you said about Susan and how she interacts with with everyone. And I think that goes back to a theme that runs through all these books, and that's about empathy. And I think empathy to me is like why you read books. You want to walk in somebody else's shoes. And the first book really leans into that. There's a subplot where I think the takeaway is if you are an empathetic person, you win. And if you are not, you are going to lose in my book. So empathy plays a huge role.
I love that.
And I think that is a clear characteristic of Susan and why, and it actually helps her with cases. And the more she does it, I mean, it's a little part of her character arc. Okay, back to the family. So in the first book, in The Disappearance of Trudy Solomon, what you learn is that Susan has a very tumultuous relationship with her mother. Vera, her mother, is an alcoholic, and Susan is an only child, and she's actually, I mean, she's an adult now, but she really never saw eye to eye with her mother. So that was a really tough relationship. And she kind of put her father on a pedestal, but her father left the family, um, when she was 13, and that's in the first book. And she's, you hold grudges against your parents, you blame your parents for your shortcomings. Well, that's sort of what she has to overcome in the first book. By the time the first book ends, Vera actually finds herself in AA. And as the second book takes off, I like to call it Vera's redemption story. So just as much as it's a story about Susan and how she goes through this change with her mother, Vera really does try to come to terms with Susan. So, even though these books are about crime and murder and money laundering, at the heart, they are about family dynamics, family dysfunction, sort of the ebb and flow of family. Sometimes your father is your ally, sometimes your mother is your ally. So that's a big part of this story too. And I take it into a different direction in the third book. And to your point, in the first book, the father, Will, he's invited to come onto the case because Trudy Solomon was his case, and he can offer a lot to the case for that reason. So he comes on sort of like an official consultant. But in the second book, he's close to Madison Garcia's family, and he is asked not to get involved. So here he is, kind of in his tricky way, because he knows that Susan is very obliging to him, that he takes advantage of that, give an inch, take a mile. So she wants him to help. She loves him, but she's also got to push him away. She can't have him involved. So there's a little bit more give and take, as you said before, push and pull in their relationship than there is in the first book. And it evolves over the three books.
I will, to your point regarding Vera's relationship with Susan, because I did not get to read the Disappearance of Trudy Solomon. Vera's presence in this book, I really like. She was really easy to fall in love with. Like, oh, like there's this, that there's something going on, but she's just like, she knows her daughter pretty well. And I'm thinking, especially when they go to sit Shiva with the family of Madison Garcia. And it was just like, you could see that she knew, based on who her husband was, who her daughter has become. And I thought that her perceptiveness in those regards, and especially when she's like, oh, well, I found out something very that could help you because I just happened to hear it. And it's like, oh, they're all kind of cut from the same cloth, even though it seems like they're all trying to like deny that they like have anything in common with one another, which feels very relatable and is an adorable aspect in, yes, we're dealing with murder, we're dealing with money laundering, we're mayhem, but there was just such warmth and love that was connected, that brought them all together. And we have, Mary, hopefully our discussion that we just had addressed your question about the tension between Susan and her father. And then, of course, Mary also says that redemption stories are always really a nice read. And Claudia is asking, she isn't as familiar with police procedurals, but do you describe the details in like violent details, or do you keep it kind of, I don't know, I guess like PG-13, PG-ish? I don't remember it being too, it's not graphic.
So I would not call these dark, gritty, crime fiction. A lot of yes, it's a murder and it's a stabbing, and I do describe it, but it's funny because I can't remember his library journal. The review is like, it sort of mixes, sort of hometown homicide, which I sort of get like sort of the cozy aspect with it, with a gritty police procedural. And I think I just strike a balance. I would actually like to I am actually trying to go darker with this fourth novel, the standalone that I'm writing. No, I would not say that these are, dark, gritty descriptions. They're just what's necessary to. I mean, it's, they're police procedurals. There's cursing because it's hard to not write a police procedural where nobody curses. I mean, it just comes out naturally.
That was
But
one thing. I was like, the language is colorful at times, but it's natural. And I think that your descriptions, and I'm viewing this as somebody who I do read a lot of cozy mysteries. But man, I will binge Forensic Files until the cows come home. And I think you strike this really nice balance of just presenting the facts of the crime scene, and giving the reader like enough to be like, okay, like, this woman was stabbed several times, but it's delivered in a tasteful way that I definitely agree that it's not too over the top.
I think people who read cozies, who are looking for something just a little bit darker. I mean, I consider these traditional mysteries in the vibe of an Agatha Christie, right? She definitely described murder, and I'm talking about more of the Hercule Poirot novels, not so much, Miss Marple's. I'm, the more of the investigator ones. So, yeah, so I think people who enjoy cozies and sort of just want to ratchet it up a bit, I think they will still be able to feel like they're not entering sort of,
it's a nice gateway.
Yeah. It's a nice gateway. You wanted a bridge from cozy to hardcore. I'm the bridge.
That's a good way, because there are so many just like warm, small town elements that we're immersed with, and I think that there is that warmth and coziness about it. So I definitely think that cozy readers who are looking to explore would very much enjoy this.
I have to say, the third book is darker. The third book is a serial killer. So those are just going to tend to be a little bit darker, because you're looking at it's a kind of very gruesome MO. But again, I do not go over the top. I know what over the top looks like. They still feel like they're in the realm of the other two books, maybe just a hair darker. And that's me wanting to push it, because in this fourth book that I'm writing, I'm trying to go darker.
And I think that makes sense from a progression standpoint, because and I think if especially and Marcy, you had made a comment about like watching TV and movies, like things aren't really getting better as you're going deeper into a series. And I'm thinking about like shows like CSI, Bones, all of these forensic based shows where like the killers just get more and more like, whoa, this is
Dexter,
too much. Yeah. So I think that's the natural progression. I'm curious and also with Madison Garcia's murder, were those crimes that you had found like that were true, based on a true story, like the disappearance of Trudy Solomon, or were these just like organic ideas that you had like come up with?
So actually the idea, how I think it was Mark who said, how do you get an idea? The idea for Madison Garcia had nothing to do with the crime. So what happened was my phone rings, and it's an unknown number, but I can see the number. It says unknown caller, I see the number. And I don't recognize it. It also said like Cleveland, Ohio. And I know somebody in Cleveland, Ohio. So I was curious, and I went on to reverse lookup, and it was actually a person. Let's say his name was, John Smith. So I looked him up on Facebook, looking for somebody from Cleveland, Ohio, to see if it was somebody I knew. I found someone, and it was actually an odd name. So it wasn't John Smith. It was actually a unique name. So I looked at that person. His Facebook page was pretty locked down. And I thought to myself, okay, whatever. But then I thought, what if the detective got a call unknown number, did the same thing I did, reverse lookup, go to Facebook, see who it is, Madison Garcia, but didn't recognize anything about them, and said, okay, yeah, just a wrong number. And then that person is the murder victim the next day. Like, so my mind just started going again, like, what if a police detective got a call and it turns out that, when they call to a crime scene the next day, that was the person who was trying to call them, but she doesn't know who they are, right? She doesn't know who they are. It turns out that that there is a connection. So that's what got that going. And once I start writing that, again, I'm a pantser. It just sort of just comes out like, this is how I want it to roll. Like, she has a cold and she's called to the scene and she meets Mark and Gloria for the first time. I didn't know who they were until they appeared on the page. And then the murder itself, like describing it. For this third book, I was telling my husband, who's also a writer, I said, I need a really kind of unique MO. What would be like a really crazy, not too gruesome, but, kind of unique serial killer MO. And he came up with one like that. So I'm going to credit him for that one. And so he goes, what if? And he describes it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm using that. So
I can't wait to find out what it is. I am absolutely fascinated by how your mind works, because to take a missed call, which I would just look at and be like, oh my God, who the heck is calling me? The most I would ever do is maybe Google the number, but like seeing that process is just like, wow, it's amazing. And there are so many other questions that I have for you, Marcy. However, we are beginning to run short on time. We're almost at the top of our hour. And I know that you are getting ready to head to the Nantucket Book Festival. What other events, places, conferences are you going to be popping up at this year that readers might be able to catch you at?
Okay, so 2 conferences. I'm going to be at Killer Nashville and I'm going to be at BoucherCon. And on August 5th, Hank Philippi Ryan, Joanna Schaffhausen, Edwin Hill, Edith Maxwell, who writes Cozy, and myself are going to be at a 2-hour event at Hingham, Massachusetts, Barnes & Noble for summer thrills and chills. It'll be a meet and greet, a Q&A, and a book signing. And that is on August 5th, if anybody's in the Boston area. And then I'll be at Crime Bake in New England Crime Bake in, I guess that's in November. So I wish I can go to every writers conference. I wish I can go to all of them.
I totally agree. I only did Malice this year, and I'm so glad that we got to connect in person while we were there. But the atmosphere it's just so wonderful, and to be surrounded by readers and writers alike, it's such a pleasure. I'm making a note of the August 5th date because we have family up in the Boston area, and it's like, you know what, I could actually probably swing that, because that sounds like an incredible panel. So
yeah, I'll
super exciting.
I'll start promoting that next week. So, if you follow me on the socials or any of those other authors, you'll begin to see that popping up. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, as we move into the remaining minutes of our hour together, folks, if you would like to enter for a chance to win a signed copy of The Murder of Madison Garcia, please make sure that you type in the word father into the chat in honor of Father's Day. Coming up this weekend, we will be doing our drawing shortly. Marcy, what are you currently reading, watching, listening to, podcasts, what have you? What recommendations can you give us?
So this book is coming out, I think next month. It is Lisa Jewell's None of This Is True. And I love Lisa Jewell mainly because her books are more like, they're playing with your mind, right? I mean, it's almost like Alice Feeney books. They just like you're reading going, what is going on? What is going on? And they're just so well done. We talk about pacing. She's like the queen of like really good pacing too. So I read a lot of my genre. I read suspense and thriller. I'm reading Hannah Morrissey's The Widowmaker. somebody said that my books are similar to hers. Hers is dark. Hers are darker than mine. And so I'm really curious. So of course I go and pick it up. I have a TBR pile like everybody else, I try to read 4 or 5 books a month. For TV shows, oh my God, I watch a lot of Netflix and Acorn and BritBox and Vera and Shetland
I
and
feel like that's the running theme for everyone that we have come on the show. It's like we're always talking about Acorn and BritBox, which is good because then it's like we all have that and we can all go and watch it.
I love foreign. I watch anything that's like all of Harlan Coben's books are in Polish. I'm like, okay, they all take place in Poland. That's interesting. But I love, like Nordic noir, and anything that takes place in Scotland, the UK. I'm gonna watch it.
I do love like a good like British police procedural. Love. I am, and for folks who have been watching our last week's show, I'm beginning to feel it's like, oh man, like I'm not like finding enough new TV to watch because I'm still working my way through Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I did pick up watching. I'm a fan of anime, Marcy. So I kind of throw that into the mix. But I just started watching Hell's Paradise, which is all over the internet right now, and it's very, very good. However, reading wise, I do have a lot of good books that I just picked up. I was lucky to grab a copy of Leah Dobrinska, who is a veteran on our show. She's been a part of our Bookish Moments and our Bookish Hour a couple times now. She has a new book coming out that is called Friends Don't. It's a sweet romance. It's really great for summer. I'm feeling all the vibes. It's fabulous. And then also on the mystery side, I am a huge fan of Jana De Leon's Misfortune mysteries. Laugh out loud to the max. Ida Bell and Gertie are like I was like, these are my sleuths. I absolutely love them. And Fortune, I love too. But Ida Bell and Gertie, who are these 2 older women that an ex-CIA agent solves crimes with. It's so much fun. And I think I'm on like book 22 at this point. It's called Frightfully Fortune. And I'm listening to that on audiobook, and it's a hoot. So it sounds like we've got some good recommendations for our viewers who were able to join us this evening. We are coming to a close of our Bookish Hour. Marcy is heading out to, could you tell us a little bit about the event that you're heading to?
So the Nantucket Book Festival runs from today through Sunday. It's really focused on literary fiction. There is a local authors tent, so I will be in there actually with my husband. It's like 20 or 22 local authors, just to sort of like meet and greet. We don't present, but it's an opportunity to meet readers. But I think there are like I want to say like 15 or 20 presenters. Today it started, there were 4, so incredible. And tonight is an event called Authors in Bars. And it's at the Nantucket Hotel. So if anybody's familiar with Ellen Hildebrand, who writes, all the beach reads, that hotel factors into a lot of books. I just bought her book. Like, it's hard not to buy her books when you live here on Nantucket, right? So, but it's such a fabulous event. And the weather's beautiful finally, because it's been kind of and so, I'm really looking forward to these next 4 days of just like listening to other authors and meeting readers, and
Authors and bars, that sounds like a really great combo. So that's fabulous. Well, Marcy, thank you so much for being here this evening to chat with me, to be bookish, to share all your insights about writing and your process and how you come up with these like twisty, amazing mysteries. So delightful. We have to do our giveaway, and because I don't have my trusty drum roller to assist me this evening, we're gonna have maybe a little less fanfare than normal. But the winner of our giveaway this evening is Mary Monin. Mary, congratulations. You are in for a big treat. If you could, let me actually put in our email address. If you could just shoot over an email to giveaways@thebookishhour.com with your mailing address, I will make sure to get that on over to Marcy. And for folks who joined us live, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you spending your Thursday evening with us. I hope that you have a wonderful weekend, a happy Father's Day. And Marcy, again, thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute delight to chat with you. And I hope that you will come back and talk more about this new book that you're working on, that this standalone, because it sounds like it's going to be another really twisty one. So we can't wait and hope to see you again. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And for folks who want to get bookish with us again next week, we have a lot of events going on this month because everybody wants to, we want to talk with as many people as possible. So we actually have 2 shows next week. We've got a bookish moment with Deborah Sendefelder. She is joining us on Tuesday. And then on Thursday for the Bookish Hour, we are joined by Trixie Silvertail. So more bookish things to do. Until then, though, happy reading and have a happy weekend, everybody. Have a good one. Thanks for being here.